Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. And RJ, we've got something to talk about that we haven't been able to talk about in quite some time. And that is that the Seattle Kraken have remembered how to win again, as they've picked up a win in each of their two games coming out of that holiday break. And they've kind of actually been impressive wins.
Yeah, I mean, you look at one win that was, I think, historic, really, and the other one that I think looked more impressive than the historic win. So it'll be fun to talk about some games in the dub column again. It's been a while, Dylan. I kind of forgot what it was like.
It's been a long time. Tasting Gatorade on a post game again was very refreshing, and it was great to get back to that. But it has been a minute, so long, in fact, that these wins are the first wins in the Deep Dives Rico Tessendor era, as we welcome in and thank our sponsor of the Deep Dive, the offices of Rico Tessendor, who's been with us now for a couple weeks, but now finally, when we get to talk about some wins.
Yeah, and what a way to get that first win too. The Vancouver game, the historic comeback and everything. I mean, that's the first win of the Rico Tessendor era that everybody is going to remember.
Exactly. So again, while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778 9800 or visit his website ricotessendor.com to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. And I'm sure he was celebrating just as hard as anybody after that Vancouver game, RJ.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we know he's a big Kraken fan, and I would love to hear the story. We got to chat with Rico next time we talk to him and see kind of what his story was celebrating that game.
I know, because we've been getting that kind of from everybody. Everybody's really going to remember where they were for that game. I talked about that on the post game, but it definitely is one of those. You just see people talking about on the Discord when they heard the news, if they weren't able to watch the game, the people that maybe left the game but then came back, all of that kind of good stuff. Would be interesting to get season ticket holders' take on that as well from Rico there. Let's go ahead though and talk about how this kind of turnaround has happened for the Kraken, RJ, because they have the historic comeback in Vancouver. They play a brilliant game against Utah last night, and they are able to pick up another win there. But so much of this just feels like we're seeing a true change in mindset for the players out there, for the Kraken, RJ, and really for that core group of guys. It's one where they're kind of playing the way that we've thought they should maybe be playing, the way the coaches have been talking about them playing. We're actually seeing them go out there and do things, RJ, like take shots or go to the net front.
Yeah, and one of our big points of frustration, right, with the losing streak is that it felt like we had our ideas of how we thought the team should play. They were roughly in line with what the coaching staff was saying as far as how the team should play. They were in line with what the players were saying as far as how they should play. We talked about that Yanni Gord interview several times, and it just wasn't being done. The players weren't going out there and doing what everybody said and knew they needed to do. And it feels like that changed really on a dime around with about 5 minutes to go in that Vancouver game. And it's been pretty consistent since.
Yeah, as consistent as the Kraken have ever looked, right? And again, we're talking about a small sample size, about a game and 10 minutes if you count in overtime in that Vancouver game. So we'll see if it's really here to stay, but just it is refreshing to kind of finally see them take those steps that, it's felt like it's been a little obvious they've needed to take, as far as having more players go to the net front, shooting more often, right? Just because, hey, you never know if they'll go in. Look at the 2 goals Matty Beniers has scored these last couple games, or just shooting for rebounds, right? Like we're seeing them kind of open up this toolbox of plays that, we're used to seeing other teams use against the Kraken, but very rarely do we see the Kraken kind of break in there and pull these things out and start using them in games. But hey, guess what? If you do, you find more consistent scoring, right? Like I said, Matty Beniers getting on the board a little bit. Andre Burakovsky gets on the board with a beautiful tip because he's lining up in the slot finally, right? He's not kind of sticking to the perimeter. He goes to the slot, is able to pick up a beautiful tip, score a goal there. And then, of course, obviously, all of this has really been led by one person, RJ, and that is Jaden Schwartz.
That's right. Jaden Schwartz. I think he's the biggest story that we need to talk about in this podcast because he has stepped up in a massive way over these last couple games for the Kraken. And I think he is the biggest reason that the message from the coaching staff and from everybody is finally getting to the players because Jaden Schwartz has taken it upon himself to be that example and to be that leader by example of exactly how the team wants to play. He is going to the net. He is throwing pucks on net from all sorts of angles, right? We saw it on the Burakovsky goal in the last game. And he seems to be taking that message to heart and just leading things himself. With Jordan Eberle out of the lineup long term, it feels like, at least in these last two games, Jaden Schwartz has stepped up as almost the de facto captain of this group. And he didn't mention it after the game last night. It's not something I don't think that he would talk about or that the coaching staff would talk about, but it feels to me like Jaden Schwartz has kind of stepped up as that conduit between the coaching staff and the players, as somebody who's finally been able to get that message across, whether it's by example, whether it's by something he's saying in the room. The guys are following. He is leading and the rest of the team is following.
Yeah, and you look at the success he's having here in the last couple games and what he's been able to do, and just the attitude of it, right? And I mean that in a good way, where it very much looked like in that Vancouver game, he just said, look, I'm tired of losing. I don't want to lose again. And that was really the catalyst that was able to springboard them into that epic comeback against the Canucks. Kind of had the same vibe about things last night, as he picks up another, 3 points. He's scoring goals at an incredible clip. And you talk about leading by example. This is similar to what Jordan Eberle did at the beginning of the season, as far as leading by example, kind of going to the crease, going net front, and being able to score at the pace he was scoring when he left. He had 6 goals in 17 games. You look at what Jaden Schwartz is doing. I mean, he's only 1 goal away from Jared McCann for the team lead right now. Like, he is really scoring goals. He's picked up 3 in these last 2 games, and that's not even counting the fourth one that ends up getting called back last night. But he's scoring goals, and he's doing it by going to the net front, by taking shots from different places, from bullying his way there, from absorbing the contact that you have to absorb to go to those areas on the ice. And he is showcasing through these incredible results he's having, and not just the personal results, but the team results as well, as they're able to complete that comeback against Vancouver, as they are able to come back in the game last night, where they do find themselves down 1-0 to Utah early on, and they're able to, kind of come out and continue to work hard. And that does start with the goal that he scored that gets taken off the board. I feel like that was another one of those moments where the team kind of responds to it. But by leading by example, taking that contact, going to those areas on the ice, taking shots from those areas on the ice, because think about that Vancouver comeback, RJ. It starts with a goal he scores from below the goal line, right? He just throws something. He thinks, hey, maybe I can bank this in off Thatcher Demko. Guess what? He could. And that's what kickstarts that comeback. All of these decisions by Jaden Schwartz seem to be things that other guys are acknowledging. And whether it's because he's echoing it with words in the locker room, or because they're just looking at it and saying, look, we're a team that was in a rut. We're losing a bunch of games in a row. We're not really scoring. Here's a guy who all of a sudden looks like he's on fire and everything he does is working for him. Maybe I should start emulating parts of his game. Whatever it is, that leading by example that he is doing is absolutely working, and it's really starting to become a little contagious with guys.
Yeah, and I'm glad I wanted to mention the contagious part, because I'm glad you mentioned that shot from below the goal line that really kicked off the Vancouver comeback. And he scores one. Yeah, he's a couple feet below the goal line. He just throws it in front. I think it deflects off a Canuck somewhere and goes in. Talk about that being contagious. The very next game, you have another Kraken player, and it's his line mate, Matty Beniers, who also scores from below the goal line. He has a breakaway chance. He doesn't score on it. It goes behind the goal line. And without even thinking about it, Matty just throws the puck toward the net, and it banks in off the goalie, Karel Vejmelka, and goes in. And that's the kind of play that I don't know that Matty would really make a week ago. Unless he had seen that sort of thing done and felt the confidence too by just throwing pucks on net. I mean, Matty got, I'd say, lucky in the Vancouver game. He throws a low percentage shot at Thatcher Demko. It just happens to go in as Demko kind of flubs it. But this is where confidence and putting the puck on net can be contagious. And I think that's a good example of it.
Yeah, and the Yanni Gord goal last night, I feel like, was also another good example of it, of Yanni kind of maybe remembering some of, what he's found success with in the past, and going to the net front and being there for it, and getting a goal and some success of his own. And I think that that's really important too, right? Not only are we seeing Matty Beniers kind of pick up some of this stuff and pick up these better habits that, we've maybe wanted to see from him, or at least knew that he was going to have to learn if he wanted to unlock that next level of offense to add to his game. But when another veteran leader, another player who has an A on their sweater, like Jaden Schwartz in Yanni Gord, picks up that same kind of style of play, but again, attitude of, I don't want to lose, I want to come out here and win again, I feel like that really sends a bigger message to everybody as well, just because now it's not just Jaden Schwartz doing it and maybe Vince Dunn from the blue line. You're also getting Matty Beniers on board as one of the young guys, and he's starting to find success. You're seeing another veteran leader in Yanni Gord have success and start playing with a different attitude in his approach to how he, approaches every shift as he's jumping over the boards, and the attitude he's going to carry. I have to feel like that would be, pervasive and kind of spread throughout the lineup.
Yeah, and we've seen it even further down in the lineup too. Again, very limited sample size. We're only able to kind of point at a few plays, but you look at last game, Andrei Burakovsky scoring a big goal off of Jaden Schwartz's point shot. You know what? He's right in front of the net. He is in that spot he needs to go to. And that's a place we don't usually see Berkey very often, but he was there. He makes a great skill play. And it does kind of spread, I think, throughout the room, even to guys that don't normally go there. When everybody is playing that way, it is contagious.
Right. I mean, it's, I know, that's why I talked about it earlier. That Berkey goal is just so like what we've needed to see from Andrei Burakovsky coming into the interior from the outside. But even I look at the Yanni Gord line and the fourth line, and guys like Ty Karche, Brandon Tanev have played well all year. Like, nobody would question their effort. Nobody would question that they've been at times some of just the more consistent and better players in this forward group. But just looking at the difference in play style last night versus what we'd seen from them previously, where there was a little bit more of an attitude of, yeah, we're going to enter the offensive zone and I'm going to be looking to hit somebody and I want to cause some disruption, but let me kind of channel that or funnel that towards the inside. Let me channel that net front. Seeing Ty Karche go there. He's a guy who has, enough size, RJ, to be a net front player at times, and seeing him kind of go to the net front a little bit more, see Brandon Tanev want to go to the net front a little bit more instead of just going and, laying out a big hit in the corner and seeing if he could do something there. Let me just actually kind of poke check the guy in the corner and then make a break towards the middle of the ice and see if, hey, maybe there's going to be a rebound opportunity or something like that for me. Just that kind of subtle change in the way that even your fourth line is playing right now kind of signals that, yes, this broader idea of what the team needs to do in order to be successful out there on the ice and particularly score more, it's getting around, and everybody's starting to pick up that message. And it's about time is what I want to say, RJ, because I feels like I've been talking about this since really this time last year. Last December is when we were really talking about the team needing to go net front more and all of that kind of stuff. And to see it finally start to happen and for it to be kind of immediately successful, I really hope this is something that kind of stays successful so that they, stay confident in doing it and trying it.
Yeah, and that's something that we've said in little spurts over the last year, right? Look, they're going to the net. They're having success. Let's hope that message sinks in. Hoping again, once more, that the message sinks in. They're able to kind of find that more consistently. And you know what? It's not just the guys who have been around this team.
Well, I was going to say, before we get to that, that was a beautiful
okay.
transition. I'm sorry to cut you off.
It's all right. Go ahead.
I know where you're
Blow
going.
it up.
But I want to ask you the question of, we talked about Jaden Schwartz, the guy who really first picked up the torch from Jaden Schwartz. We haven't talked about too much, and that was Vince Dunn in the Vancouver game, right? Jaden Schwartz picks up that kind of lucky one, very businesslike, right? If you the other thing we didn't talk about with that goal that and then I'll get to Vince Dunn, is he scores that goal the rest of the team goes to celebrate with him, and he like barely wants to kind of tap hands with them. He's just locked in. He's still pissed off. Like, look at his face in the celebration after that first goal Jaden Schwartz scores against Vancouver. He's mad because guess what? They're still down by 2, right? He
We're down
understands
4-2.
that.
We played a bad
Yeah,
game. We haven't
yeah.
done anything yet.
Exactly. So he's still mad. And then you get Vince Dunn coming out there, kind of recognizing that moment, recognizing all of that stuff. And he's really the first person to pick up the torch or the gauntlet that was thrown down by Jaden Schwartz, RJ. And we talked about it. It was pointed out to us. And we talked about this during the post game after that game. They were both members of that 2019 St. Louis Blues team that had to really rally back after being in last place in the Western Conference, barely makes the playoffs, goes on a run in the postseason, ends up winning a Stanley Cup. And so my question to you is, RJ, you and I have kind of always talked about GMs love to, add, cups in the room, rings in the room, right? That's always a big thing as far as teams believing that you do need players who have been there, done that in order to teach and kind of build a culture within a locker room. The Kraken have added those guys. They added more in like Chandler Stevenson this past offseason, right? And Brandon Montour coming in after just winning in Florida last year. Is this kind of really our first time seeing that effect with this team? Because I think it is.
Yeah, I like the way you phrased the question because I tend to think the cups in the room are very overrated.
Me too.
And that they don't really translate to the on ice stuff. And so I was going to push back a little bit if you were suggesting that was really a trend.
We need more, RJ. We need more.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, your question, is this the first time we've seen this with the Kraken? Yes, I think it is. Because I don't think it was entirely a coincidence that it was those two people that put the team on their back, and that with the Kraken being so far out of it. I mean, for comparison's sake, I brought up the stat last week, right, about how the Kraken were going to be 8 points out of the playoffs by Christmas. And you look at that 2019 Blues team, they were 7 points out of the playoffs by Christmas. That is the level of mountain that the Kraken have to climb. And like I said, I don't think it was a coincidence that it was Vince Dunn and it was Jaden Schwartz that have kind of kickstarted things here, because they recognize the situation the Kraken are in, but also that you can, in some very fringe cases, pull yourself out of it. And they've been part of that. So to them, it is still something that's very possible. So I think there is an element of that. But yeah, for the first time, maybe we are seeing cups in the room really matter.
Yeah. And maybe it's not so much just, players who have been there, done that one in the postseason. Maybe it is more specific to guys that were really part of a special group that was able to overcome and do something that really just should not have been doable. Or it's just two hyper competitive guys who are just both happen to have that ability of, if they decide they're not going to lose that night, they can go out there and be a game changer for you. Certainly we've wondered if Vince Dunn is of that level of defenseman. Maybe this is definitely another example of him maybe being that guy. But it is interesting, and it is for the first time you can see like the idea that GMs are going for when they make some of the moves that they make. I still think largely a lot of the moves they make are sometimes mistakes when they value that potential leadership too high, but you can get occasionally results like this.
Yeah. Or you can, reverse the causality and say, well, the Blues won that cup because even their depth guys, like a Jaden Schwartz or a Vince Dunn for that run, had that mentality, right? And were able to do those sorts of things. I mean, that's how I feel about when we were talking about Brandon Montour and how amazing he's been with the Kraken. Like, that guy was on your second D pair, third D pair sometimes with Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he is on your third D pair, right, or second power play unit, man, you're stacked.
Yeah, you should win.
That's kind of how I feel about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there probably is an element of that in it as well. Yes. All right. Not to sorry again for blowing up your beautiful
All
transition there, talking about not just the players we're used to seeing maybe stepping up here, but maybe a newcomer as well.
That's right. And you talk about players who have gotten that message and seem to be on board with the way the team is playing. Capo Caco. And I was talked about the shooting mentality, right? Getting pucks on net, throwing them out from everywhere, especially in that Utah game. That's the first time we really saw it all come together in a full game. And the Kraken shot leader in that one, Capo Caco, 5 shots on goal, doesn't score on any of them, but he gets 2 beautiful assists.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like he is really starting to hit his stride and making the most of the opportunity that he's been given. He's just looked better and better, which I guess maybe we shouldn't be surprised by, just with the fact that he actually is now been able to practice with the team. His first practice at home was a couple days ago, right before the Utah game. That's just wild that he played so many games and still only had the one chance to practice on the road and then one proper practice at home. And feels like those practices are maybe helping him find chemistry with some of the guys, because he's able to set up 2 breakaways in back-to-back shifts, with a gorgeous pass to Jaden Schwartz for a goal there, and then the pass to set up Matty Beniers for his breakaway. He scores shortly after that one, kind of throwing the puck from behind the goal line. But Capo Caco is just fitting in with this group so well.
He really is. And, there was lots of reasons to think that he could or that he should. And there was lots of reasons to think that he was the kind of player exactly that the Kraken needed to target, both, going back to our idea of, kind of following the Florida model of, hey, go target these players that were drafted very high, that have skill in there somewhere, but for whatever reason, it just hasn't worked out with their original team that drafted them. He obviously, fits that bill. We've talked about that before, but also just being a forward with size, somebody who does understand going to the net front and wants to play there. And we have certainly seen that from him in all of these games, RJ. It feels like just about in each one of the 5 games he has played with the Kraken, there has been at least one moment where he has had the puck in close against a netminder. And while he hasn't necessarily really scored on any of them, those are still just chances nobody on this team was really generating before. And they're chances that, force a defense to have to play honest. They have to stay in and at least keep one guy close to their goaltender. That opens up more space and time for guys elsewhere, in especially the slot, these better areas. And I think we're starting to see that work out for that line, particularly with Jaden Schwartz and Matty Beniers, having Capo Caco there playing that way. But just so much of what he does, I mean, there's so many things I want to talk about with him here, RJ. I guess I'll stick with the offensive stuff though first. And that is one of the things I didn't realize he was going to bring was kind of a shooter's mentality, right? And you talk about the whole team kind of having that idea and that kind of picking up that idea that they needed to have. He's got 10 shots on goal in his 5 games, 17 shot attempts. That already puts him, just from like a shots on goal perspective, like kind of in the upper half of this team, because this is not a team that really wants to take 2 shots on goal per game. Are you kidding me? So I just think just having him have a nose for the net and be willing to take shots from those areas, RJ, or when he has a look, he's going to take it. And I do think a little bit that first period one where he tried to make the pass to Matty in Vancouver and it was just kind of a disaster. I think that was like the one time he broke out of that. And given the result of that play, you probably won't try it again for a while. But I just think having that mentality from him, given the places that he plays on the ice, has just been a godsend for this group.
Absolutely. And the size too, the ability to get some of that, especially working in the corner and just creating possession and offensive zone chances as well. It helps get those second opportunities, right? Winning those battles, getting to those pucks, and creating prolonged zone time. He's been a godsend for this line, and you can see the chemistry really developing too with him and Matty Beniers. You look at what this line has done. And I think that's another big story for the Kraken right now, is they have a proper first line.
Mm-hmm.
And it has Matty Beniers on it too, which is a great big story, right, for Matty Beniers and his development. But the Kraken have a proper first line, and they've been playing them that way. They have been far and away the leaders in 5-on-5 ice time, this line, since they've been put together. And it's a line that the Kraken can put even against other teams' top lines. We've seen that responsibility move to the Matty Beniers line rather than the Chandler Stevenson line. And they've been able to win in those matchups as well. You look at last game against Utah, and that was the only line the Kraken had that was over 50% as far as, shots, shot attempts, expected goals, really the only line that got the better of its competition in that game. And shots were 14-4 in favor of that line when they were on the ice. Shots on goal, which is really impressive. And so that is a big story to me as well, is that Dan Bylsma finally has a line that he can put out there for big minutes in a game, and they're going to win matchups against just about anybody. And that's not something they've really had. I mean, you've had the Stevenson line usually get a lot of the ice time and play against some of these tough matchups, but they've just been absolutely caved in. Now you've got a proper first line that can stand up to, feels like, just about anybody.
Right. No, and it is a huge deal, and they've absolutely been playing fantastic. I wonder how much of this, RJ, going back to Capo Caco and kind of what he's brought. Obviously, we talked about in the offensive zone. How much of this, though, is him taking a little bit of defensive pressure off Matty Beniers? Because Capo Caco has also made some great plays in the defensive zone. We know what his capabilities are as a defensive winger. That's, primarily how he was used in New York. It just seems like to me he's been able to kind of take a little bit of that pressure off Matty defensively so that Matty can focus just that tiny bit more on what's going on in the offensive zone. Because if you look at all the other line mates Matty's really had this year, Matty has had to be the guy that's like, okay, I've got to zero in on the defense because I'm playing with guys that in theory should be more offensively minded or be the guys taking care of things offensively. But now he's got Jaden Schwartz, who's responsible and can get things done in the defensive zone. And then Capo Caco, who has a wonderful active stick in the defensive zone, is great at breaking up passes, disrupting plays on the perimeter as far as teams trying to cycle the puck back to their defenseman. Capo Caco is just always sitting in their lane. That has to take a lot of that pressure off Matty Beniers, a lot of his, mental focus that he's going to be using out there on a shift. He doesn't necessarily have to use all of it strictly in the defensive zone. Now he's able to open it up a little bit more in the offensive zone, and he doesn't have to worry about playing back in the offensive zone because he's got to worry about being back defensively because Capo Caco can help him cover in transition. I really do wonder how much having a guy who is so responsible and good in the defensive zone on Matty's wing has really just helped him kind of not have to worry about it so much, not feel like he has to make that all of his game the way that it's really seemed like this last year and a half he has been.
Yeah, I think there could definitely be something to that. And you look at Capo Caco when he came over in the trade and his body of work with the Rangers, and his defensive numbers were pretty consistently good.
Yeah.
He always was good in his own zone. He always had the defensive ability. It was just, can he produce to the level of a top 5 pick? And that was kind of the disappointing part with him. And I think we've seen that defensive ability just transfer right over with the Kraken. And I think maybe that does help take a little bit off of Matty Beniers. And as far as the, how that works with Matty Beniers and kind of finding the line mates that work for him too, even if you approach it with the mindset that we kind of had last week, and I think still largely have, of playoffs are unlikely, right? What's really important that you can get out of this season, and your young players in Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, you have to figure out what they need, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can you surround them with long term that's going to lead to their success overall? And I think we're finding out some very important things about Matty Beniers and the types of players that he can thrive with on a line. And as you go forward, and I'm talking 3-5 years out, right? That longer term time horizon, and you're trying to build a team around your young should be franchise players, knowing that a player like this, like Capo Caco and a player like Jaden Schwartz, that those are the kind of players that give Matty Beniers success. I mean, that's a lesson you can take with you for a long time.
It really is. And especially having Capo Caco at only 23 years of age, gonna be under team
you could keep
control.
This very player.
Like you could just keep him with Matty Beniers for a long time, and that's gonna be something that I know the team is gonna be interested in should this kind of continue out the rest of the year. But imagine that, RJ. Who would have ever thought, or maybe nobody could have dared suggest Matty Beniers needed a power forward on his wing to give him time and space to work to the inside. Wow. It's absolutely wild. What a concept.
Yeah, I guess they are just learning this right now.
Exactly.
Something that may have been theorized beforehand.
Yeah, but it's been great to see from him. Just him play with confidence again, Matty Beniers. Like, it's just been so long, RJ. Like, I forgot what it looked like. But I think back to like when he first stepped into the NHL for that 10-game stint at the end of year 1 and how confident he played. I mean, we talked about it at the time, right? Just stepping onto the ice to practice with that group, you were like, oh, that's the best player out there. And it was just because he was so confident and he had the skill and he could just go out there and kind of do whatever he wanted. And he played in those games and he racked up the 9 points in 10 games because he was just playing like he had something to prove, but also like somebody who was just like, no, I got this. Like, I can do this and I can play here and I belong here. And he had that through a lot of that second season while that team was playing well. And it felt like, yeah, he's somebody who can be prone to go on these long scoreless droughts. And it felt like maybe some of that confidence was drained and disappeared through these long scoring droughts. And that's really affected him the last season. And then obviously this year, as his shooting percentage has done nothing but go down as he's been in the NHL, which is not traditionally what it's supposed to do. But hopefully here, playing with these guys and kind of developing a different mentality in the offensive zone will help correct some of that.
Yeah, and the hockey gods work in kind of funny ways, right? Where for 19 games, they're doing everything they can to convince Matty Beniers that luck is not on his side, right?
Yes.
And you are never going to get the bounces, and you can do whatever you're going to do. Goals are not going to go in for you. And then for 2 games, it's the complete opposite. You look at the 2 goals he scored, and it's been just throwing a puck on net and it happening to go in. And so hopefully he gets a few more of those, to the point, because again, I don't know Matty Beniers. We haven't talked to him about this, but I feel like just watching his body language and his reactions from the goals, especially the one in the last game, like he doesn't fully believe it yet. You know what I mean? And I don't blame him, because
I wouldn't.
you miss on a breakaway and then you just throw it in from behind the goal line and it goes in. Like, you'd still be skeptical about whether things are really going your way quite yet.
Right.
But I just hope he gets a couple more. I mean, maybe the next one could be a really pretty one. I think that could fully get him on board with, yeah, you know what, I'm not snake bitten anymore.
Yeah, and because again, we've talked about he's getting shots from the places he should be getting shots from. Like, he is doing the work that you should. And you look at the Vancouver game. He had a beautiful chance in the first period. Like, that's supposed to be the shot he scores on, not the one where Thatcher Demko just, I don't know, forgets to grab the puck out of the air later on at the beginning of the second period. Like, I do like that he's finally getting goals, and so he's getting the luck and kind of the stuff he deserves there. But I also don't want to take away from him kind of through that long goalless drought. He was still trying to generate chances, quote unquote, the right way.
Yeah, it gets lost in the last couple games because he's scored 2 goals, right?
Yeah.
But he has had, between those games, I think 3 or 4 grade A chances, like absolute dynamite chances that he has not scored on.
Yeah.
And so yeah, he's still generating those.
Yeah, and 7 combined shots on goal through these last 2 games. So again, he's doing the stuff that we've wanted to see from him. He is shooting more. He is going to those areas on the ice. It's just odd that the results he has seen have come the way that they have. But that's hockey, and this is why sometimes we talk about it's a weird sport to try and boil down to numbers and all of that kind of stuff, because sometimes you get things like this, where you have a guy shooting at a ridiculously low percentage from high danger areas, but then he can just score off shots that 999 times out of 1,000 are not going to go in. It's just hockey.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about 7 shots in the last 2 games for Matty Beniers combined. I went to look at it really quick, and the last time that he had 7 shots in the Anaheim game alone earlier this year in one of the Anaheim games. You wipe that out, and he hasn't had 7 shots in a 2-game stretch since like February of last year. Like, this is not a common occurrence for him, but that's good. It shows to me that this is something unusual, right? That he is maybe changing things a little bit.
Yeah. And what did we think for all of these guys? Because so much of this feels like change that happened during that, Christmas break, right? Like, these are the games that we've seen them play post break. We know that during that time frame, they weren't really in contact with the coaching staff. They're not going in for practices. It's not like they were using that time off to be in the, facilities and really going over tape and all of that kind of stuff. I think this is also like a good positive sign, because that means the players just kind of did this on their own, right? Like, they had a second to kind of reflect on the first half of the year, both their personal performance and the team performance, and to be like, it's not enough.
Well, I think they needed to do it on their own. We've talked about this a ton last week going into the break, talking about how, look, the coaching staff has said everything that they can possibly say. Even the front office, Ron Francis, has made the moves that he can make, right? He's made trades to try and spark the group. At the end of the day, it just had to be on the players to go out and do it, to figure that out, realize that they didn't want to lose. They didn't want the season to go the way that it was going, and to change something about it. They knew what they were supposed to do. So it's great to see that it's coming from the players. I don't know that it could have really happened any other way.
Right. But I guess I'm just happy because it really felt like that wasn't going to be something that was going to happen, because it just felt like if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. So I guess I'm just happy that, for at least a handful of these guys, it feels like it has, and that's been able to then either spark others or at least elevate enough of the team that you can get to winning results.
Yeah, and certainly in the case of Jaden Schwartz, for example, right? We talked to him after the last game, after the Utah game, and the first question, the media scrum, which awesome from our friend Kate Shefty, by the way. So of course, Schwartz has just had these amazing 2 games, right? We get in for the scrum, and like, all right, go ahead with the questions, and Kate's just like, so did you just like have a really great Christmas, or? And I love she started it out that way. But Schwartz's answer to that basically was just, look, I wasn't happy with how we were playing. And I think he said not we, just like, I wasn't happy with how we were playing. And I think he's kind of taken it upon himself, right, to do those things. We talked all about Schwartz.
Yeah.
But I do think that's kind of really the takeaway from the larger group, is that they weren't happy with how they were playing. And maybe it took that break, that time off, to really stew in and think about it. I know, Bilesby even said, and some of the other people right around the team kind of hinted, you just kind of need to flush it, forget about it. I don't think they did.
No,
I think they really felt it.
And I'm okay with that. Like, I think at some point you do have to like just feel it and let it sit with you for a couple days and really be like, wow, I'm not playing as well as I should be. Or we're not playing as well as we should be. And I'm not doing the things that I, know in the back of my mind are the things that I need to be doing, or the way that I need to be playing, or when the coach tells me something, or they draw something up, or they're pointing something out in the video room. Am I really doing everything I can there to make that change that I have to make the next time I go out there in a game, right? The next time I hop over the boards after looking at the tablet on the bench, am I really doing what I need to be doing? Am I really making that adjustment, or am I maybe, half-assing it, or am I just kind of defaulting to what I feel like doing, or something like that? And I do feel like the time off, when you've had the season go the way it has gone, given the expectations that were on you, and the fact that, yes, the coaching staff has kind of pulled all the levers they can pull, the GM has pulled all the levers he can pull, I do feel like there are times where, yes, feeling that disappointment and that anger with yourself can be productive. It can be something that you just need to actually go through. You got to, beat yourself up internally a little bit, and you've got to feel it, and then use that to, channel yourself and go out there and play better. Certainly professional athletes are that way, right? Like, the athlete psychology is very different than like a, normal everyday person psychology, but that's a lot of what it is. When your job is so directly tied to your personal performance in an extremely public way and platform that is going to be dissected for hours after you've gone out there for 60 minutes and played and done your job, right? That is one of the things that goes into it, is you have to sometimes let a little bit of that creep in if you're not playing well, and listen to it and take that, swallow that hard pill to swallow, and go out there and change what you're doing. And this was a team that did need to do that, right? Like, we've done everything but say that directly, but it was a team that needed to do that. And it does seem like they have done that and used the break as constructively as they possibly could have, all things considered.
Yeah, it was a much needed break, certainly at that time. If I can go on a bit of an aside, that we do forget that, I think, a lot of the time, that just how different this is from anything that you or I or anybody else really experiences in their workplace. If you can imagine, listener, right? Whatever your job is, if every other day you had 17,000 people watching you very closely doing what you do, people like Dylan and I commenting on it, the little details of you doing what you do, and just having a big win, you won today or you lost today every other day. And by the way, it's not just on you. There's 19 other people that you're working with, that greatly affect whether you have that win or you have that loss. So it's not just all on you and what you do. It's just, it's so different from anything any of us really experience in what we do. So it's, I don't know, it's easy to forget about that, but it is just a different kind of psychology that happens when that's the system that you're in.
Yeah, it's a wild thing to really think about as you really break it down and you know try to apply it to your life if you can, and it is extremely difficult to to really be able to put yourself in those shoes, because like I just don't know that you really can. Right, like we're in some ways what we're doing right now is very public facing, and so like we're putting ourselves out there for the public in a similar way, but our performance and job isn't as like directly results tied the way theirs is. Like nobody's going to be talking about us after this podcast and breaking down, you know, when I flubbed something earlier or whatever, right? Like there isn't that extra level of commentary about how we performed other than, you know, just the occasional online troll.
Right. And while we're on the topic too, the physical effects on your body, and this is something that Dan was talking about at practice the other day, talking about the holiday break. And he kind of tried to warn us, I guess, before the Vancouver game coming back. He's like, look, the first game back after the Christmas break is going to be sloppy for both teams. It's just, yeah, I think he might have even used the word ugly. Like it's just going to be ugly all around, because he said, you know, 4 days off, which is what they had for Christmas break. He said that is an eternity for a pro athlete, because he said the way the body works after, you know, when you're in that rhythm, in that routine of pushing your body so hard, like every other day, 2 days off, like after 2 days in between games, right? The body just starts to, and I think he said heal itself. The body starts to heal itself. It starts to kind of shut off from that work mode, right? And just go into a different mode of trying to, like, you know, heal the things, right? So 4 days, you're completely in a different physical state. And, you know, maybe people who are listening to this who, you know, work with their hands a lot, that, you know, have really physically demanding jobs feel a little bit of this. But I feel like a lot of people that, like, for the Christmas break, you and I, Dylan, right? Physically with our body, you know, it wasn't some massive change by having the four days of, you know, not working or doing what we do. So it's just another element that is just wild to think about.
Yeah, because athletes have to push their bodies to the brink of what human bodies are capable of doing, particularly hockey players where you have an 82 game season of this, right? And it's going to go on for just months on end. It really is one of those things where your body, you know, bodies are pretty incredible machines, and they can put up with a lot, and they will find a way to deal with that trauma that it's experiencing from all sides, and not just, you know, the physical trauma of playing the game, but also all of the workouts that you're doing and all of that stuff that you're putting it through. And it'll find a way to deal with that stuff. But yeah, the moment it has a break, it wants to kind of break down and heal and go through the recovery process, and then to ramp back up from that is not easy to do, right? And obviously modern athletes have, you know, the best systems in place that athletes have ever had as far as recoveries after a game so that their body can get going, as far as being able to rehydrate faster, better materials for that, ice baths, hot baths, you know, oxygen bags, all of that kind of stuff that you can do to stimulate blood flow so that your muscles can start, you know, the recovery process before you have to play again in 2 nights. All of those little things that go into it, the food that you give your body, it's all better than before, but it's still just something that, yeah, 4 days off, half a week, that is a long time, I got to imagine, because that's long enough for your metabolism to start changing, because you're not going through that game process and everything. Like it's a lot.
And that's one reason where, and thank you for letting me go on that tangent, by the way.
Yeah, no, I
But
love it.
that is one reason where maybe this time I might be, excuse me, a little bit more inclined to believe that coming back from that process and getting back to where you need to be could take, say, 55 minutes into a
Yes.
game. Whereas if the team was in their normal routine, right, I would, you know, you look at that game and there's no excuse for it, right?
Mhm.
But it is something that Coach Bilesma warned us about a little bit ahead of time. I mean, the push with 5 minutes skill, we've seen that earlier this season, so it might feel a little bit
Right.
too convenient. But the fact they were able to follow it up with a win in a game where they did play generally a little bit better, I'm a little bit more inclined to believe it, and that's, I think, a big reason why through the first 40 or so minutes of this podcast, it's kind of had more of an upbeat note,
Mhm.
and maybe at least for the time being, believing that perhaps they've turned a corner rather than the normal skepticism that we might have. And I think that still exists very much
Right.
within us, because especially if you look at the larger situation, right? It's 2 wins, but it's still only a tiny little fraction of what they need to do to actually put themselves back in something like the playoff conversation.
Yeah.
Um, but this is why I'm kind of more inclined to maybe give them a break and maybe believe that they have figured some stuff out, rather than saying, look, I've seen this before. This is an inconsistent team. They've done this for 2 games before. I don't expect it to continue. Maybe it's just kind of hoping and wanting that maybe they figured something out. But I don't know. Where are you with that?
Well, I mean, it's basically what we talked about just a little bit ago, as far as like this is where the public nature of their job kicks in, because look, yeah, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that something has changed here, because you are doing it coming off of a break where we just talked about, right? Physically, you're having to work yourself back in a way that where you have to push yourself and kind of get back into both the physical and mental mindset that you need to be in to perform your duties as a professional athlete and do your job. That gives you an opening for you to work in some of those new habits that maybe you've been thinking about that you need to work in and add to your game, right? Like the fact that they are coming off of that little bit of a break makes it feel a little bit more reasonable that you could add things to your game, build up those habitual habits, as Dan always likes to talk about, and really start having a fundamental change to the way that you play night in, night out, versus just a random Tuesday, I expect Matty Beniers to play differently than he has for the previous 19 games, right? Like it is a little bit different. So like I'm with you there as far as them doing it, but public aspect of their job, they have to prove it to us, because this is still largely a group that, as you said, has done this before and never really been able to keep it going for all that long a time. And so it is going to be on them to kind of dictate if we continue to talk about them in a positive light, or if we kind of fall back to the stuff that we were talking about last week as far as resetting expectations and kind of where everything needs to go. It can only be determined by them, right? Like we're not going to choose to be negative if the team is winning just to, out of spite or something, right? Like we're not going to do that. All of the conversations around this team are ultimately determined by them. And so they have to, in that sense, like put up or shut up, and kind of, can you prove that you can do this for longer than a 2-game sample size? And I really want them to. Like, again, we very much want this to be real. This is what we've been wanting to see from them for so long. So I'm very hopeful. And yes, I think that, yeah, the break makes me a little bit more optimistic that it could really happen, because as you said, we've seen this team not play until the last 10 minutes of a game. I've talked about it several times during our live game commentaries of, like halfway through the first period, you just kind of know, like, okay, well, we know the team's going to show up when there's 10 minutes left. Let's just hope the hole they have to dig themselves out of isn't too deep, right? Like that's been a lot of the story of this year. Hopefully, they don't kind of continue to play that way beyond that Vancouver game. They didn't. They got themselves out of the hole pretty quick against Utah. Hopefully that's a sign of real change there.
Right. And that's one of the things that we talked about too, is how do you take that last minute push, bottle that, and kind of put it at other times in the game, right? Where it's not too late. I think the Kraken did effectively do that against Utah. And look, if you're going to have a last minute push, right, if that's going to be the whole story of this team, you're kind of in a position where you need it. I guess you did make a comment, I think before we started recording, about how maybe even treating the season the way that they treat a game, where you get to the Christmas break and you're pretty much all but out of it. And, and now you start kind of pushing where maybe it is too little too late, but there is still more than half the season to go. It is certainly not too late. There's, again, more than half the season left. But if they
certainly waited
together some wins.
They certainly waited until the odds said that they, were just about out of it. Like this is not.
They waited till the odds got under 1%.
Yeah. Yep, just like they do in a game.
it's
ridiculous.
It's just like the Vancouver game, right? So I mean that's still one of the generally like kind of frustrating bits about this, is that they waited till the odds got to just about next to nothing. But
to the point where we were very much talking about them having a top 5 pick at the draft. Like we were there.
Yeah, no, we were there. I know you were on board with that, looking at all the prospects and
Yep.
everything, but we can't quite be there yet. Even though the odds are still very long. I mean, just a quick check in on that. Like the Kraken they're 6 points out of a playoff spot, but that doesn't really tell the full story. Just given the games in hand that the other teams have, I think the best way to look at it for me is that the Kraken are 2 games under 500. We kind of use that 500 mark, and the nearest team they're chasing, Vancouver, is 7 games over 500. So that's kind of the hill that they have to climb. Although that is also the Kraken's next opponent.
Yeah, I'm so pumped for that game on Thursday, RJ, because Vancouver's going to come in so motivated, and I love the way this Kraken team's playing and the stuff that they're building, RJ, including the looks on the power play. I know we wanted to talk about that. Got about 10 minutes here left on the podcast. The power play, the looks that they were getting in this game against Utah, RJ. Oh my gosh. Again, things that we've talked about that we've wanted to see from this group. Passes, RJ, that weren't just back to the defenseman at the point. I can't believe it. I nearly died.
They even had a couple just little passes to the bumper and back to relieve pressure. I mean, that's something that a good normal power play will do that we don't usually see from the Kraken. It was wonderful to see.
Yeah, it's a good thing I wasn't up there on the press bridge, because I need to be standing for my back. Seeing that, I very well could have fainted and just fallen right off.
Yeah.
Like,
Can't have that.
No. But it was great seeing that, the different looks on the power play. That's something that, look, they're going to need to continue to practice it. They're going to need to continue to get game reps. But just the fact that the power play for the first time in a long time looks like it has a little bit of life that could then develop into more dangerous opportunities, I'm really, really excited about, because so much of it was getting looks for guys in spots that we're not used to seeing the Kraken be able to operate with time and space. The power play was so predictable and so stuck on the perimeter. Other teams knew, yeah, we'll just play a very closed, tight box here in the middle, take away the middle lanes, take away the slot. Kraken aren't going to do anything. Our goalie just has to worry about, low percentage shots from bad angles, and we'll just sit out these 2 minutes and we'll be fine. That wasn't the case against Utah, right? They were doing enough interesting things that Utah had to start playing them honest on the PK, and then that opened up gaps and holes. You look at where Jaden Schwartz was able to get his goal that's, again, called back. But that's a place where he had time and space that we're not used to seeing anybody on the Kraken, one, operate from, much less operate with that much time and space.
Right, and Utah was clearly not ready for that too. Schwartz had the time and space to kind of fake out the goalie Vejmelka there from that spot, but the amount of varied looks that we saw on just because they only had 2 power plays. It's 4 minutes of power play time, 2 power plays. We saw that Schwartz look. We saw a couple Tolvin and one-timers. We saw a couple McCann shots from his spot on the left side with players going to the net, and if you get a little better bounce there, that can bounce in. We saw, I loved this one, Capo Caco driving the net. I mean, just trying to stuff it in, jam the puck in. A little bit extra reach, he might have had that one. And then we saw, a couple of the normal shots from the point, but I could count maybe 5 or 6 different types of looks that the Kraken threw at Utah. And it's not something we're used to seeing. And then also the shooting mentality that we've talked so much about carried over onto the power play. Through 4 minutes of power play time, 10 shot attempts from that Kraken power play, which I don't know when the last time they had 10 shot attempts through 2 power plays was. It feels like it's been a while. And then according to Natural Stat Trick here, 7 scoring chances in the 4 minutes of power play time. They don't end up with a goal that ends up counting on that power play, on those power plays, but they also help generate momentum, I think, too, because that's something that really killed the Kraken earlier this year too, because score or don't score, you can't always control that, right? Like bounces happen, power plays are kind of a fickle thing, but I think you can control whether it builds momentum for you or kills momentum for you. And for way too long this season, the Kraken power play has killed momentum, and recently it's done the opposite.
Exactly. And that's, again, big for this group that seems to be working off of momentum for the first time in a while. At the end of that Vancouver game, they were able to build that momentum. They were able to largely carry it over into the Arizona game, able to carry momentum into power plays, out of power plays, all of that good stuff. I mean, it really felt like this was a group, RJ, that, they could have been a playoff team. I guess technically they still can be, but they needed certain things to kind of go their way, special teams being one of them, if they can correct the special teams thing, if they're able to grind out an extra goal per game just because they're going to the net a little bit more, that just completely changes the outlook for this group as far as your game by game results and your ability to tip it over that kind of 50% threshold of, are we going to win tonight? And just seeing it happen again, it means so much. It's just, is it too late in the season? We'll find out. And more importantly, can they keep it up, and can they play this way kind of consistently for the next couple months? Because I think that that's going to be really important for them. One of the things I'm going to be looking for with this play as well, RJ, and in addition to all the offensive stuff that we've talked about in the power play, the defensive play, because you and I talked about it after post game last night, but like, they played a perfect game defensively against what Utah wants to do as far as attacking in transition and everything. And the Kraken were like, look, we're not going to give you the attack off the transition. We'll give you the ozone time because you're not comfortable playing from the perimeter. And boy, Utah did not look comfortable from there. I've never seen Clayton Keller quite look so clueless as to what he's trying to do out there. But, that's still a little bit of a dangerous proposition. You're going to give a team that does have offensive weapons, a lot of offensive zone time. It required the defense to really step up and make sure that they were, keeping their heads on swivels, manning their positions, keeping to their zones, and in a way that we haven't really seen from the team that frequently this year, they did do that. They weren't kind of getting confused as to who's going to jump up into a spot. Like, they very much looked like they understood what their responsibilities were and what everybody around theirs responsibilities were. And that was really great to see too.
It took me a while to realize what was going on, really to confirm it, until I got to talk to you a little bit after post game about it, because you weren't up there in the press bridge with me. And normally I would have been asking you about that mid game. But at first, with that Utah game, with how much offensive zone time Utah was getting, really from the start of the game, I was thinking, oh no, the Kraken are just getting caved in here. And it sure looked like that, because Utah had a bunch of time in the offensive zone. Kraken barely had any chances in the Utah zone. And I figured, man, they've come out slow again. They're not starting on time. But as the game went on, that sort of thing continued. But the Kraken were just defending it really well. And you took away Utah's transition game. They had no transition chances. They couldn't, because they were already in your zone the entire time, which sounds like a bold strategy there. And as you said, it's probably not the kind of thing you want to repeat against some teams that are a little bit different, but it worked. And the Kraken got all the transition chances, and you know what? They buried them. Mm-hmm. You look at the, at the Schwartz breakaway goal, right? That's just a quick up transition play. You look at Matty Benier's goal coming off that breakaway. That's a quick up transition play. You take away what Utah does best. You give yourself those kinds of chances. And as long as you can convert, it works. And so, again, I wouldn't repeat it against a lot of teams, but against Utah, it's the perfect strategy. And just, I think it's worth pointing out that kind of a coaching masterclass there by Bilesma and that staff. I think really they out-coached Utah.
Yeah, no, they absolutely did. And it was great to see. And I'm very curious to see if we see more of those chances for that top line because of Capo Caco being able to feed the transition, not just because he can make those beautiful stretch passes, RJ, but because, again, the places he likes to play on the ice, he likes to play up in that zone and really wait for the opportunity to pick off those passes between a blue line and the winger for the other team in the defensive zone. He's been able to spring a lot of breakaways, and yes, he's been able to make the passes, and that's great, but really it's because of the work he does defensively that is able to get him the puck and get the team moving in a positive direction, where so much of the other team is deep in the offensive zone. They're not going to be able to help out defensively. I just want to highlight Capo Caco one more time before we end things.
And with that, real quick on the Caco thing too, I just wanted to mention something that I don't think I got a chance to talk about last post game with that long stretch pass to Jaden Schwartz for the breakaway. If you were at the game, if you were in the building, a little assist to you on that goal, because he was asked about kind of what he saw on that play, and he got the puck and he kind of had his head down because he had just got the puck, and he said that he heard the crowd, just the sound for the crowd, like oh, as though there was that breakaway pass available, which of course we could see from up top, right? But as a player, it's so hard to see that, right?
Yeah.
And he said that was the first indication he knew that there was something up there, is that he just heard the crowd react in the way that they did, and so he just kind of threw a puck up there. He wasn't even really like looking at the stick or anything. The pass happened to be perfect, but that was the indication, right? And so little assist to the home crowd there. I thought that was kind of cool.
Home ice advantage. It's not dead, RJ. Before we end things here, let's do a quick update on goaltender Joey Daccord. Obviously, one of everybody's favorite players on the Seattle Kraken, RJ. And what the disappointing bit of news coming out of the holiday break was that Joey is still dealing with an injury from that Colorado game, and he has not been able to even back up Philip Grubauer these last 2 games.
Right. So the important injury update here with Joey Daccord. And so as you mentioned, yeah, he had that injury. And we saw in the Colorado game, if you watched that game, he kind of got tied up net front with, I think, his teammate or an Avs player, right? And it was holding his arm a little bit. Came off, but he did finish the game. So we got a little bit more clarity on that from Coach Bilesma. He said that it's an upper body injury, first of all. So it kind of matches what we saw with him grabbing his arm. And then it started, I guess, the day before the Colorado game in practice. He injured himself. And then in the Colorado game, what we all saw, he kind of aggravated that injury. And as we can tell by the fact that he hasn't been backing up, it's still not quite good enough to play or to be available to play. He did skate a couple days ago, practice the day before the Utah game. He did skate by himself before practice. I wasn't there early enough to see it. I don't think any of us in the media were. So he did that, but he did not practice with the team, still has not practiced with the team since. He has not been backing up for games. Alex Stezka has been up from Coachella Valley for that. He's still officially day-to-day. The next step in the progression would then be to join a practice again and kind of see how he reacts at that point. We'll see tomorrow. The Kraken don't have a practice today, but we'll see tomorrow on New Year's Day if he practices with the team. But hopefully speedy recovery for Joey. I mean, from all the stuff around the team, it doesn't sound like it's anything too long-term, but of course, not having him available, it does hurt. It makes a big difference. Thankfully, Philip Grubauer, and that's something we haven't talked about really a bunch, but Grubauer getting 2 big wins in Joey's place. And that's something that, even a month ago, around Thanksgiving time, that would have been a big question, right? If Joey was out for any kind of stretch of time, can Grubauer hold down the fort? And so far he has. Yeah,
no, it has been great to see there from him. Speaking of Joey's injury, if you're dealing with an injury that you picked up at either, I don't know, work, in the car, maybe in one of the busy return lines at a store after the holidays are now kind of over, you can reach out for a free consultation to the law offices of Rico Tessendor, either by going to his website, ricotessendor.com, or by calling 425-778-9800. Again, 425-778-9800. Again, go schedule a free consultation. See if he can help you out the way he's helped out thousands of people in the greater Seattle area, especially because you're an ECH community member. I don't know. Probably helps.
Yeah, excellent transition there that you may notice was not interrupted.
Yeah, okay, you're right. I know. I'm sorry. We had to talk about the cups of the room, RJ. We had to do it.
Yes, very important. Cups of the room, always very important.
Yes. Ask any general manager. The most important thing. Lou Lamoriello would have been happy with that, RJ.
Yep, definitely.
I guess that all the more reason I shouldn't have done it, actually, now that I think about it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.